of microeconomics of first semester is the cardinal approach to utility analysis. This chapter includes the introduction, cardinal utility approach, utility and its features, measurement of utility, total utility and marginal utility, law of diminishing marginal utility, the important assumptions, and the merits and limitations. I take an opportunity to introduce this unit by stating that theories of demand relates to theories of consumer behavior. These theories offer the behavioral foundation for the analysis of demand. It is a well-known fact that a consumer, in order to get maximum satisfaction with his limited resources, that is income, he makes choice among innumerable commodities available to him. Consumer's choice generates demand for goods. Many economists have contributed to the theories of demand which explains the consumer behavior or consumer choice. These economists have followed different approaches in explaining the consumer behavior. This unit analyzes the cardinal approach to the theory of consumer behavior. Let us understand the concept cardinal utility approach. Cardinal approach to the theory of consumer behavior was first adopted by classical economists and later developed by neoclassical economists like Alfred Marshall and Arthur Cecil Pigou. According to this approach, a consumer purchases certain commodity because they possess utility. The concept utility refers to the power of satisfying the consumer wants. According to Marshall, utility can be measured cardinally, that is, it is possible to know exactly the number of units of utility that a commodity at a service contains for the consumer. To measure the utility, Marshall followed cardinal approach, which implies introspection. Introspection is the ability of the observer to reconstruct the events and which go in the mind of another person with the help of self-observation. This form of comprehension is just a guesswork or the result of experiences. Thus, introspection implies that a given response to stimulate in one's mind will generate similar response in the minds of other persons. For example, if a person feels that with every increase in the quantity of a commodity, the utility derived from the commodity declines, then others also would have a similar experience. The cardinal utility analysis is based on some basic assumption. First one is the rationality. Consumer is thought to be a rational human being. His main aim is to maximize his utility with his limited resources or the income. In order to maximize his level of satisfaction, he has to make consistent choice that if he prefers A to B and B to C, then he does not prefer C to A. Constancy of the marginal utility of money. According to this assumption, money being the unit of measurement of utility, it should remain constant as the consumer spends more and more on the commodity. It is the marginal utility of money itself changes as the consumer spends, then it cannot correctly measure the marginal utility of a commodity. Now, let us understand what is utility and its features. The concept of utility was first used by an economist called William Stanley Jevons, but the concept is popularized in the name of Alfred Marshall. In the ordinary language, Utility means usefulness. But in economics, the term utility means the power or the capacity of a commodity or services to satisfy a human want. In short, it is the want satisfying power of a commodity. In this sense, all those goods which satisfy human wants are said to possess utility. Let us understand the features of utility. Utility and usefulness are not one and the same. In the ordinary language, utility may means usefulness. Anything which satisfies human wants is said to have utility. For example, the opium is a drug, poison, tobacco, etc. are not useful to a human being. They are not useful to the health of the human beings, but they have utility because they satisfy human wants. Utility is subjective. Utility is essentially an introspective or subjective concept. It relates to the inner sentiments and emotions of human beings, so it has no physical existence. Since utility is a subjective concept, it varies from person to person, place to place, and time to time. Now, two consumers will get the same amount of utility from the consumption of the same commodity. Similarly, a particular commodity will not give same level of utility in all places and in all seasons. Utility has no ethical or moral significance. The term utility has no ethical or moral significance. A particular thing may be good or bad. If it satisfies a human want, it is said that it possesses utility. The best example, gun has utility to the dacoits, but using gun by the dacoits is not ethically correct. The utility is neutral as regards ends. Utility and pleasure are not one and the same. Utility is different from pleasure. A thing may have utility, but it may not give pleasure to the consumer at the time of consumption. What is the best example? See here, you will be suffering from a fever. You will take tablets or injections. While taking tablets or injection, do you feel so much of pleasure? No, it doesn't give the pleasure for you, but it satisfies the wants. That is, it has got some utility. Utility cannot ignore legal considerations. A commodity or a service may have utility, but law may not permit to use these commodity and services. For example, a knife used by a robbers has utility, but law will not permit the use of knife for robbery. Utility and satisfaction are not one and the same. Utility is not the same as satisfaction. In other words, utility is not satisfaction itself. Utility is want satisfying quality possessed by the commodity, whereas satisfaction is what one gets from the consumption of a commodity. Utility is expected satisfaction, whereas satisfaction is realized utility. Utility of a commodity is thought of by a person before its consumption, but the question of satisfaction of a commodity comes only after its consumption. In other words, utility is what one thinks of a commodity, whereas satisfaction is what one gets of a thing. Utility depends on the intensity of a want. Utility depends on the intensity of a human want. The want which is more intense to the consumer will give him more utility. Forms of utility. There are 4 forms of utility. They are mentioned as: form utility is the utility which is added to the commodity just by changing the form or shape of the commodity. Place utility is the utility which is added to the commodity by transforming goods from one place to another place. Time utility is the utility which is added to the good just by storing goods when they are available in abundance and supplying when they are in scarce. Service utility refers to the creation of utility through the rendering of some services which satisfies human wants. Utility is created by the services of doctors, lawyers, teachers, singers, etc. are the best example for service utility. Let us understand the measurement of utility. Measurement of utility is a subjective concept. It cannot be directly and accurately measured, but utility can be measured indirectly and expressed in terms of units. Utility is measured through the price one is prepared to pay for the commodity. That means a consumer will get equal amount of satisfaction to the price of the commodity. High priced goods give him more utility, whereas low priced goods give him less utility. Though utility can be measured indirectly through the measuring rod of money, the problem of utility of money arises. Money will not give equal utility to all people. Utility of money is different for different groups of people. Let us understand the concept total utility and marginal utility. Before discussing the law of diminishing marginal utility, let us know the meaning of total utility and marginal utility. Total utility means utility derived by the consumer regarding all units of the commodity taken together for consumption. More specifically, total utility tends to be more with larger stocks and less with the smaller stock. Mathematically, it can be shown as TUX is equal to F of QX, where TUX means total utility of commodity, QX is the quantity of X, F is nothing but the functional relations. The equation TUX is the function of QX shows that utility depends on the quantity of the commodity. Marginal utility, on the other hand, refers to the utility which is added to the total utility as a result of consuming one more unit of a commodity. In other words, marginal utility is the utility derived from the last unit of the consumption. For example, suppose a consumer gets 18 units of total utility from the consumption of 2 units of cake and 24 units of total utility upon consuming these units. Then the marginal utility would be 6 units. Mathematically, it can be calculated as follows. Marginal utility, which is equal to change in the total utility divided by changes in the quantity, MUX, which is equal to delta TUX divided by delta QX. In economic analysis, both the concept of total utility and marginal utility are extensively used. We can notice some sort of relationship between total utility and the marginal utility. At the consumption of a particular commodity increases, both marginal utility and the total utility also changes. As consumption increases, marginal utility goes on diminishing till it becomes zero, and in the end it becomes negative. When the consumption increases, the total utility increases. When the total utility is maximum, the marginal utility is minimum, and when total utility is diminishing, marginal utility becomes negative. One of the important law is law of diminishing marginal utility. Marshall explains the marginal utility analysis of demand, which is based on fundamental assumptions about marginal utility behavior, called the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law states that other things remaining constant, marginal utility derived by the consumer from the consumption of a commodity goes on diminishing as the consumer consumes more and more of it. This law applies to single want with a commodity in one use. The law is based on the common experience. The law of diminishing marginal utility may be attributed to two factors, namely that individual wants are suitable and different commodities are imperfect substitutes of one another in the satisfaction of particular wants. Thus, the law is based upon the psychological fact that as the consumer consumes more and more units of a commodity, the intensity of his wants for it goes on diminishing, and when it reaches the point of saturation, he needs no more of the commodity. The point of satisfying means zero marginal utility of the commodity. It is based on some of the important assumptions. The important assumptions are: different units of goods consumed are homogeneous. Second important assumption is there is no time interval between the consumption of two commodities. Taste, fashion, etc. of the consumer remains constant. There is only one commodity on which the consumer spends his income, and price of the good remains constant. Income of the consumer also remaining constant. Based on the above assumptions, the law states that when a person acquires more and more units, if the same commodity at a given time, the utility from the successive units will diminish. For example, the satisfaction which a consumer derives from a first apple will be definitely more than the second apple. Similarly, satisfaction or the utility derives from the consumption of second apple will be greater than the third apple, and so on. This can be explained with the help of an imaginary schedule given here. See, in this, the total utility for each unit is increasing, but the marginal utility is deteriorating for every additional unit. Let us understand the merits and the limitations of law of diminishing marginal utility. Law of diminishing marginal utility is the basis of all other laws of consumption, namely law of equimarginal utility, law of demand, etc. There are a few limitations to the law of diminishing marginal utility. In case of liquor, it is said that more a person drinks, the marginal utility of the liquor is said to be rising instead of falling. In the case of miser, it is said that more one has of it, the greater is the desire to acquire still more and more. This law does not have good in the case of rare collections like stamp collection, coins collection, rare picture collections, etc. In all these cases, marginal utility tends to increase instead of diminishing. Besides, the law of diminishing marginal utility is applicable to single want with a commodity in one use. But in reality, there may be a number of wants to be satisfied with many goods at a time. I conclude by saying that utility is the power of a commodity to satisfy a human want. Marshall followed Cardinal approach to measure the utility, according which utility can be quantifiable. Cardinal utility is based on certain assumptions like consumer rationality, constant utility of money, independent and additively. The behavior of cardinal utility has been hypothesized by Marshall in the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law states that other things being equal, the successive consumption of a commodity, marginal utility of it tends to decline. the law of diminishing marginal utility tends to decline. The law of diminishing marginal utility is based on the common experience of the individual. The law states that, other things being equal, the successive consumption of a commodity, marginal utility of it tends to decline. Law of diminishing marginal utility is based on common experience of the individual. This law is the basis of all other laws of consumption, namely law of equimarginal utility, law of demand, etc. But this does not hold good in case of consumption of liquor, miser, and collection of rare pictures. Thank you.